Welcome. It's wonderful to see you all here. My name is David Hart. I'm the director of the Senator George J. Mitchell Center at the University of Maine. We've got a wonderful program ahead, and I'm going to jump right into it. It's my pleasure to welcome the Provost of the University of Maine, Susan Hunter.
Well, thank you, David. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you on behalf of the University of Maine to the annual Senator George J. Mitchell Lecture on Sustainability. You will hear later about Senator Mitchell's absence, but we're obviously delighted that the speaker is here today, Professor Baruch Fischhoff, and I'll leave further comments about their impressive credentials to other people who will follow me at the podium. Maine is among the nation's leaders in sustainability science, thanks to innovative research led by Maine's Sustainability Solutions Initiative, or SSI as we call it, which is based here at the university in the Senator George J. Mitchell Center for Environmental and Watershed Research. This center is all the more stronger because it bears the name of a man whose influence and vision have had such an impact on our natural environment. SSI is an interdisciplinary effort writ large, and many UMaine units and individuals are playing key roles. It is supported in part by a $20 million grant from the National Science Foundation's EPSCoR program, and we're very proud of our leadership role. It is also important to note that SSI is a partnership with every other higher educational institution in the state of Maine, both public and private. SSI is working to help Maine communities solve urgent problems at the intersection of economic, social, and environmental issues. It's a tall order, but the SSI approach is unique. It brings together interdisciplinary teams of researchers from higher education institutions throughout Maine with stakeholders and citizens to tackle tough problems. The entire process, from identifying the problems to developing and implementing solutions, is a two-way conversation between researchers and stakeholders. By gaining a better understanding of the information needs of diverse stakeholders, SSI seeks to help society make better decisions. Fortunately, one of the world's leading experts on information needs and decision-making processes is with us here today, and that's Professor Fischhoff. So we're in for a fascinating session. I'd like to thank several sponsors for their generous support of this year's Mitchell Lecture, including the National Science Foundation, the Maine EPSCoR Office, the Senator George J. Mitchell Center, and the Sustainability Solutions Initiative. I'd also like to thank each of you for your interest in sustainability science, which seeks to meet human needs while preserving the planet's life support systems. And it's questions in those realms that Director David Hart and Professor Linda Silka and their SSI colleagues work on every day. And with that, please welcome Professor Silka, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Fischhoff, the Carnegie Mellon Howard Heinz University Professor from the Department of Social and Decision Sciences and the Department of Engineering and Public Policy. That alone makes it really interesting to hear what he has to say, doesn't it? Dr. Fischhoff is past president of the Society for Judgment and Decision Making, as well as the Society for Risk Analysis. He currently chairs the Food and Drug Administration's Risk Communication Advisory Committee. Dr. Fischhoff has co-authored or edited 7 books, including Acceptable Risk and Risk Communication, a Mental Models Approach. Dr. Fischhoff's visionary work unites many perspectives and disciplines. In discussions prior to his coming to campus, it was amazing to hear how many scholars at this university and in this state from many different disciplines, political science, economics, engineering, and of course psychology, who see his work as forming a cornerstone of the intellectual work that they draw on for what they do. Much discussion these days focuses on the importance of boundary spanning, of moving beyond our disciplines to integrate perspectives, problems, and solutions. Dr. Fischhoff is an international leader in helping us look for core approaches that will further the solutions to key intellectual problems of our time. And so it's with great pleasure that we welcome Dr. Fischhoff and look forward to his presentation.
thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me. I'm really honored to be here, and particularly to be giving a lecture that bears the name of Senator Mitchell. I'm skipping class today, and I told my students that their assignment was to read his Wikipedia entry and think about, and then read it more than once on a regular basis to think about what a life in public service might mean. So I'm really honored by it, and I've actually really been pleased to learn so much about a bit about the sustainability initiative that you have here, and that it's seeing what you've been able to do, things that many institutions struggle to do. I think Carnegie Mellon, where I am now, raised itself by its bootstraps, partly by giving people freedom to do things that they couldn't do other places, that doing a kind of horizontal integration across the disciplines and vertical integration between people doing theoretical work and people working on practical problems. And there's not a lot of institutions that are able to do that, and I think you've had the leadership and the community support that have made this possible. So I'm impressed by what you've done. So I hope I'll try to use your time well. I'd like to talk about how do you help science to speak for itself in improving communication between science and citizens. So a part of sustainability science is that what people decide affects the environment. What energy sources should I use? Where shall I invest my money or my company's? What lifestyle do I want? How far will I live from work and from my family? And in the other direction, what people decide depends on the environment. Will my trees, fish, crops, garden be savaged by invasive bugs or diseases? Will the tourists keep coming? Can my children get well if we still live here? Can I drink that water, milk, or coffee? And if not, what else can I drink? In order to make these decisions, people need trusted, comprehensible information about the risks and benefits of the actions that they might take. Unfortunately, what they often get is something less. So if you're facing medical decisions, you might get information that looks like this. It doesn't look, it's no more, improve the resolution, it doesn't improve the communication. This one is an amusing one because most of it is in two-point font. The one thing that's in 3-point font is a box in the lower left-hand corner. This is from a nasal inhalant that my son Noam was taking some years ago, that wants you to know that chlorofluorocarbons are being used as a propellant in this nasal inhalant, and so that we're all going to die so that you can breathe freely. And we know the bureaucratic processes that made the 2-point font and the other ones that led to the 3-point font. So you can say a lot and say nothing. Conversely, you can say little and say nothing. So for years I've been working with a group, Gil Welch, Lisa Schwartz, and Steve Voloshin at the Dartmouth Medical School, who've been trying to provide medical information in useful terms to people. They had a lovely article about 10 years ago in the New England Journal of Medicine asking about these two stamps. So there was the stamp on the left. It was a breast cancer stamp. It says fund the fight, find a cure. It had a surcharge. I understand the philatelists don't like that. It was a 32-cent stamp. Remember the days of 32-cent stamps with an 8-cent surcharge. And then the Congress decided that there should be a stamp for prostate cancer awareness. So the one on the left is neutral. The one on the right gives medical advice, which many of you may know, particularly know if you're reading the New York Times, the paper the last week, is controversial medical advice. And they talk about how it is that this controversial medical advice, how the controversy is lost and a categorical recommendation is made. Here's another kind of information. If you go to ready.gov, you'll find what to do, how to be informed if there's a nuclear blast. I was on the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Advisory Committee, so I must some way bear responsibility for this. So if you look at the panel on the left, it tells you to look for the fallout shelter. So maybe someplace around here there's a rusting sign showing from the Cold War area fallout shelters, but that wouldn't be very helpful. The one in the middle is I particularly like. I don't know if you can read it, and I guess you probably can't read it, but there's the blast, and the arrow says, this is your possible escape route. So you'd have to be fleet of foot to do that. And then there's this kind of non-assertive, or maybe it says, you probably can't read it, but it says, consider if you can get out of the area. I don't want to be too authoritative in this situation. And this is on, if you go to ready.gov, and it says important notices. You'll get to a notice that says, a disclaimer, we are not responsible if information that we make available on this site is not accurate, complete, or current. The materials on this site are provided for general information only, and any reliance upon the material found on this site will be at your own risk. We reserve the right to modify the contents of the site at any time, but we have no obligation to update any information on the site. You agree that it is your responsibility to monitor changes to the site. So proceed at your own risk. So really, you can't make this stuff up. These are all made by well-meaning people. They're trying to do it, and you have to wonder, why isn't this working? Oh, actually, I have one more I had here. So this is from January of this year. DHS to scrap color code terror alert, and 2 days later, Russia adopts color-coded terror alert systems. They probably got a real good deal. Maybe on eBay. So if you have poor communications undermine decision-making by missing opportunities to help people make sound choices, to learn about their concerns, to design better options, and to get full value from the science that's created to help people to live better lives. Poor communications can also undermine public trust, our civil society, our social contract, by suggesting that those people who have and control the information are either indifferent to their public, deaf to its needs, so they don't know how to serve them, or even hostile to public concern, so they produce communications whose message is to confuse people. So what does it take to communicate better? It takes a strategically designed process. It requires the requisite set of skills, requires a scientific approach, and has standards to determine whether your communications are adequate. So there are best practices, but best practices can be terrible. In the end, this is a question of evidence. Have you done your job right? So I'd like to walk through these 4 stages. So a strategically designed process. This is my favorite. There's versions of this kind of guidance from at least all of the English-speaking countries. I like the one from Canada the best. I like their graphic the best. This is from the Canadian Standard Association. It's a quasi-governmental body, affirmed in 1997. Produced in 1997, reaffirmed in 2002. It came out concurrently with our Presidential Congressional Commission on Risk, which has the same thing but with a different graphic. So in the middle, you have a standard process for managing risks. It starts with the initiation. You do a preliminary analysis, kind of a standard project development. The one nice thing that the Canadians do, you probably can't see this, but it has 4-way arrows in between the different stages saying, if you haven't done the job, go back at that. If you haven't completed that stage right, go back and do it again. I think once we start, we get it done, whether we've done the job right or not. But importantly, the Canadian guidance has risk communication throughout, as a part of all of these stages, connected by 2-way arrows. So it says when you begin a risk, to manage a risk, you listen to your public and then you tell them what you're doing, so you have the best chance of addressing their needs and not blindsiding them with the outputs of their results. And this is the obligation that you need all the way along. If you don't create those communication channels, then you have much less chance of doing work that serves the public interest. So then you need a requisite set of skills. You need a kind of team that can do the job adequately. So what are the skills that you need? You need people who really understand the problem, whether it's climate or an energy source or pharmaceuticals. If the team doesn't have the facts and the associated uncertainties on their side, they can't do the job. You need decision analysts, people who will winnow down the vast mass of facts that you might be able to communicate to those few that really matter. You need social scientists who can be your ears to the public to hear what their concerns are, and can be the people who help to design communications that are comprehensible and then test whether or not they actually work. And finally, you need systems specialists who make this whole thing work. You need people who will get the mics in the right place, invite people to come in, make certain that everything is legal, make certain that your leadership isn't blindsided by initiatives that are going on. And if you miss any of these components, you're likely to undermine the communication. You'll find these kinds of expertise in organizations of any size, but it takes really leadership to be able to pull them all together and to ensure that they play the appropriate roles. So you don't have psychologists imagining what the facts are about medicine or climate or energy, and you don't have engineers saying, I really know what the public needs to hear, let me add them. So you need this kind of team, and you need people playing their roles. And then you need a scientific approach to developing, you need a scientific approach to understanding your public and then to developing the communications. And you need the research as part of any project for two reasons. One is that our intuitions about communication are faulty, and the second, that the basic behavioral research, which will constrain our communications and should inform them, is indeterminate about what to say and how to say it in any specific situation. So first, our intuitions are faulty. So many psychologists, we make our living showing people's limited intuitions about other people and about how well they communicate. And there's a long litany of things you probably learned in Psych 101. There's the common knowledge effect, whereby we exaggerate how well what we know, how widely what we know is shared by other people, so we leave important things we treat important things as going without saying, and then we leave gaps in our argument and people can't follow our drift. There's the false consensus effect, whereby we think that other people share our values to a much greater extent than they actually do, because we can't imagine how anybody would see the world differently. Those are deep intuitions, and you need some way to hear from other people to know what's on their mind. You can't imagine it. Secondly, so there is basic research that's out there, and that's what we do for a living. What it finds, this was a characterization that I attribute to Herb Simon, who was a polymath, Nobel laureate in economics, but a polymath at Carnegie Mellon. Herb would say that decision-making follows simple principles. So here are some of the principles in which there are supporting research literatures about principles of judgment, that is, how we assess the world around us. So we know that people are good at tracking what they see. There are people who believe, most psychologists have believed for a long time, that it's almost as though we have internal counters in our brain that tell us how often we've seen something. In fact, the controversies are about exactly how that counter works. Do we maintain additional individual tokens of each time we've seen a particular kind of accident or crime or malfeasance, or do we have one sort of iconic representation of that kind of problem that gets stronger and stronger each time we see it? So you can do some interesting science sorting that out, but people are good at knowing how often they've seen things. But they're not good at detecting how biased their samples are. We may not even think that our samples are biased, and if we do, it's hard to know where the problems are. So we can be misled in situations where appearances are deceiving, where some problems are highlighted and other problems are hidden. So we have many such principles. People are have a limited ability to evaluate the extent of their own knowledge. So we tend to know when we're better informed and worse informed, but we tend to exaggerate our ability to make distinctions between situations in which we know a lot and know a little. It can lead to overconfidence or underconfidence. And I have colleagues who make their living trying to understand when this happens. And we have other principles dealing with choice. That is, you assess the situation and you're trying to figure out what to do. So take the third, people are insensitive to opportunity costs. So you know if you don't know, if you decide to do something, you neglect what would go on the road, the path that hasn't been taken, because it's just less tangible than what you do. If you fail to make an investment in yourself or in something, you just don't see the things that are out there. Or turns out that often, to look at the last item, we often think that when decisions are difficult it's because we don't have enough facts, but often with decisions, and particularly decisions regarding risk, the real uncertainty lies in ourselves. We don't really know what we want. We don't know how to get a purchase on the situation. You keep hoping that somebody will tell you something that will enable you to decide, but in the end, we face difficult choices and we have to figure out how to live with their consequences. You could think of difficult medical decisions that you make for yourself or for younger or older loved ones. So we have a lot of principles like this. So decision making follows simple principles. However, the set of principles is large, the contextuals of triggers are subtle, and their interactions are complex. So you just don't know which of these principles are going to come and how they're going to play out in a particular situation. So when you're going to design a particular situation, you need empirical research to determine what people believe and want in a particular situation so you can address their information needs in a useful way. And you need analytical research to determine what of all the things that you could conceivably tell them will be most useful to them. There's typically a narrow window of opportunity of communicating, particularly on technical issues, and that window will shrink if you give people information that leads them to think that you haven't really thought about their circumstances and their information needs, their background knowledge. People can learn a lot if they feel like they're capable of gaining information, and they'll close down if they think that communication is impossible. So I'd like to briefly show a few examples of the kind of research that combines these different skill sets. I'll put this up briefly. These are some of the projects that our research group has looked at, but there's many more out there. But if you had a question later, I could give you the gory details of any of these projects. So here's a project that was a colleague, graduate student John Mers, who's now at the bioethics group at Penn, did for his dissertation. He said, well, looking at medical informed consent, there's often a lot of things that can go wrong with complicated medical products. And he took procedures. And he took as example carotid endarterectomy. I think this is from Gray's Anatomy. I looked for a blurred bit of clip art to show my blurred medical knowledge, but probably some of you have had this surgery, and maybe some of you have done this surgery. But the carotid artery is here. If you have plaque there, it can lead to strokes. There are people who are very skilled at scraping out the carotid artery. If the surgery works well, it's known to give people a better and longer life. But they've got something sharp in your neck, and it's general anesthesia, and people are often not healthy going into the procedure. And a lot of things could potentially go wrong. So here's a truncated list of some of the possible side effects of this surgery. Intuitively, you think that some of these are more important than others, but which are more important depends both on the severity of the consequences. So death is worse than a stomach ache or gastrointestinal upset. But if you can't die, then it's, but you could, you could have really serious stomach problems. And maybe the gastrointestinal risk is the serious risk. So John picked this problem because it's such a well-known surgery. There are a lot of data on this. And the way John formulated this problem in an analytical sense, he said, imagine you had I don't want to wish this on you, but imagine you had a population of people who were candidates for this surgery, and you told them about each of these things that could go wrong, and they knew how severe it was, and they knew how probable it was. How many of them would say, yeah, I'd have the surgery if it weren't for the risk of X? And he said you should start with the things that would change the decisions for the most people. And so what he found was that in this order, that if you believed our analysis, that the risk of death was big enough that 15% of these hypothetical patients would not have the surgery if they knew how big the risk of death were, and very few would learn about the risk of would care about the risk of broken teeth. And so John's claim would be, don't hide anything from people, but make certain they understand the risk of death, the risk of stroke, and the risk of facial paralysis, and make certain they understand both the probability and the consequences, because that constitutes adequate understanding. And in this case, these are feasible communication goals if you you understand the medical science, you've done the decision analysis, you communicate the probabilities and the consequences, which we know how to do, and you have a medical system that is set up so that patients get access to this information at an appropriate time, and then the physicians or the other healthcare professionals have the time to work with people and understand this. So this is something we could do. Here's a second example. The lead here was Liz Casbin, who's a microbiologist in our group. We were asked by the American Waterworks Research Foundation to develop the perfect boil water notice. And it's a living. And anyways, so what Liz did is to develop a risk model, trying to figure what we found when we started to talk to people about waterborne diseases is that people were often suspicious about the notices they get about their water quality. They didn't know, were the lawyers just putting this out? Why were they so detailed? If you're on public water, then you pay your water bills, you'll get a consumer confidence report every year. Try to read it. It's good disclosure, but it's perhaps more information than people want, and without much of the context we need. So we found that people wanted to know what this was all about. So she built a model trying to predict how changes in our public water system could affect cryptosporidium risk. And this is a kind of model for those who don't do these kinds of things. You click on a node and it gives you the best available science there. You can do quantitative modeling of the probability or the extent of waterborne diseases. And what Liz found in one of our analyses was that, imagine we went from a situation where half of the people currently would get a boil water notice through mass media or whatever, and half of them would know how to boil water appropriately. Imagine you went to a situation where everybody got the notice and everybody knew how to boil water. What difference would this make in our cryptosporidium risk? So we ran the model and found that it would make no difference whatsoever. And so it took us a while to figure this out, and what the fact was, this was about 10 years ago, that cryptosporidium is at that time, I think it's just improved, but at that time cryptosporidium was very difficult to detect. And it took a long time you had an imperfect test that took about a week to have the culture produced. And by that time, the people who were vulnerable had already suffered. And it was particularly, if I understand correctly, it goes to your liver and then goes to town. And so particularly people with AIDS were very vulnerable to this. So this combination of the modeling, which was designed to guide behavior research, revealed a problem in our communication system, that we were trying to use communication to solve a problem that could only be solved with better civil engineering and public health. The same model could show that if you had better real-time testing, which is feasible for E. coli, you might be able to rely on communications. But otherwise, you needed to find, for cryptosporidium, you needed to find other ways to protect the people who were vulnerable. So we should not be relying on communication to do the impossible. As another example, we were asked by the Centers for Disease Control to try to understand the vaccine program. We were asked to understand the sources of resistance to the MMR vaccine. So we created a model. All of these are published papers if anybody is interested. This came out in Vaccine about 3 years ago. We created a model of the factors that determine the risk and benefits of vaccination, and then interviewed first-time mothers, who are often the people who make these decide what to do. Being a first-time mom is often the time when these decisions are made. You've got to think it through. One of the things that we found was that if you look at the kinds of communications that come out of our official sources, as opposed to the kinds of communications that come out of vaccine skeptics, you find that our official communications often have kind of isolated facts. So we mapped into this model of all the things that you could say, things from communications from different sources. The one on the top is an official source that says, to greatly simplify, take this, it will be good. It's obviously much more complicated. It has lots of good information. It's vetted by a group of experts, but it's a scientist's approach to it. If you look at the communications from the skeptics, they kind of trace a path. They tell stories of individuals who, by their claim, have had bad experiences with vaccines, and they have their view of some of the same facts, and they give you a narrative that helps those facts to hold together, so you can understand the supporters of vaccine have a better story, could tell it more effectively, but create their communications in a way that doesn't have the kind of feedback with the audience. It's a scientist-driven communication and doesn't have the kind of feedback that you would need. If you look at the language that's used in official communications and the language that's used by the skeptics, you find that if you did a Google search, this is an easy, straightforward kind of research. If you think about what would I look for as I was trying to find the risks and benefits of MMR vaccine, you'd end up on the skeptic site and not on the officials site. So you could do better, but to do better, you need to be disciplined by the evidence, and it would be helpful to know the general evidence about communication, but also to create evidence to test your own the studies that you're trying to design. So what do you get if you have evidence? If you abide by evidence for your own communications, well, you need to have some standard for adequacy on whether you've done your job appropriately. So what might those standards be? So here's one formulation. A communication is adequate if it has the information that people need for effective decision making, if people can access that information, and third, that people can comprehend what they access. So a next level of elaboration would be you've passed the materiality standard for your communication if it contains any information that might affect a significant fraction of users' choices. You've passed you have a proximity standard for information accessibility would be that a communication is adequate if it puts most users within X degrees of separation from the needed information given their normal search patterns. There are people who find it very easy to give up on the public by pointing to anecdotal information of people who have seemingly misunderstood communications, assuming that the problems are all on the side of the receiver and not on the side of the communicators. Or we'll point to people who, with many issues, are for one reason or another, unable to access the communication. They may not be literate, they may be sick, they may be suffering from other things, but you don't have to reach every individual with your communication for it to serve a public good. You just need to get it into the hands of somebody who can get that information into the mind of the person who needs it, and we all rely on other people to connect us with information. Somebody helps us with investments, someone with medical problems, somebody with heating problems. So there's a proximity standard for getting the information to people. And the third criterion is understanding if the information is in there and you've gotten it to people, can they use it? So a comprehensibility standard would be that a communication is adequate if most users can extract enough information to make sound choices. So you can't satisfy any of these criteria without doing research. You don't know what the information is unless you've analyzed it in light of the decisions that people are making. That is, the critical information is not what you as the expert think people ought to know or what you'd like to get across in a teachable moment. The critical information is what they need in order to make decisions. This is the communication of science. This is not science education in situations where people face real decisions. So good communication requires a strategically designed process. So you ensure that you have the kind of interfaces with your public, either direct or through intermediaries or through social science research that will connect them. It has the right skill set, so you're talking authoritatively about the science in a way that works and in a way that's within the law and respects your public process. You need a commitment to research, know the science that's out there, and choosing not to fly blind in terms of how well you're doing. And you need a standard of adequacy or accountability to see how well you're doing. So, well, who does this? So let me speak with pride about the Food and Drug Administration. I've been chairing their Risk Communication Advisory Committee for the last 4 years. FDA has, and this began during the latter years of the Bush administration, and when Andy van Eschenbach was the commissioner. As far as I can tell, has bipartisan support. FDA completed work on a strategic plan for risk communication. I recommend this to anybody. You can just Google that and you'll find it. It's got a program for building up, for doing the kinds of things that I was talking about, for building up the scientific staff, for collecting evidence. They've got a 70-odd point program that they're slowly working through. One of the things that's on their agenda is to find a way from going from this kind of a communication to this kind of communication, which would be a drug fact box that parallels the nutrition fact box. The Dartmouth group, who were behind that postage stamp slide early on, have been working behind this. So Google drug fact box, and you'll see evidence that they've collected that if you do a good job, that that most people can extract the information that they need from a well-designed drug fact box. Not everybody, perhaps not every decision, but we can do that if we have a disciplined approach and trust and respect our audience. FDA is now working on a project to implement what they're calling a framework for summarizing the basis of their drug licensing decisions that will make accessible to the general public the evidence that it views as most pertinent to decisions, along with the uncertainties attendant to that evidence regarding the risks and the benefits of pharmaceutical products, along with the what they're calling conclusions and reasons, which are the bases of the regulatory interpretation of the kind of evidence that they're providing. So if you can imagine any body of experts, if you summarize your evidence in decision-relevant terms, you have something that you can then hand off to the communication team, which can then begin to develop communications and then check back with the experts to be sure that they got the facts right before they go live. You can be ready for emergencies. You can have continuous communication flows in developing problem. We know how to do this. If anybody's interested, the FDA's the Communication Committee just put out this book, available for free download, about how anybody can do communication. It has 3,000-word chapters, each structured to say, this is what the science says about, say, doctor-patient communication, the use of the media, how to communicate quantitative information, how to give people mental models about how these risks are created and controlled. This is a best guess at what it means for communication, and this is how you can evaluate your attempts to act on these best guesses, recognizing that even the best science can't give you anything more than a best guess, and to overcome the very strong aversion you find in many places to collecting evidence about communications. The final section in every chapter says, this is how you can do an evaluation for no money at all. Here's how you can do evaluation for a little bit of money, and here's how you can do evaluation for the amount of money that is relevant to that is proportionate to the stakes riding on good communications in terms of the health of the people who are making these decisions, the well-being of the organizations that are doing them, and the reputations of the politicians and leaders who that can be undermined by having done a poor job of communication. And so I think FDA is trying to do that. You can find other agencies, CDC in parts are trying to do that. And from having the opportunity to read about your activities, I think that you all are trying to do that. So I really applaud your effort. Thank you. Okay. You want to?
I'm going to go up there and you can stay right there.
Okay, all right.
What a pleasure. That was really great.
Oh, thank you.
We're fortunate to have a few minutes to have people ask some questions. And if you have a question that you're going to ask, and we hope there are lots of you that do, we need to have you ask it into a microphone, because there's some people who couldn't be here today, and this is being recorded, and they'll want to hear your question and the answers too. So let's get started. We have a few minutes for questions that help us think about the interesting work that we just heard about.
So are you guys, Larry LaCour from New Media, are you guys thinking about this prostate cancer controversy? This thing that's sort of a bit of a mess, I think, in the way they've been dealing with it.
Yeah. I think that the prostate cancer the communication about the screening guidelines is what the soccer people would call an own goal. That is, it's a needless self-inflicted injury. So we had, in 1998, we had I think it's actually maybe the same task force, the same preventive services task force, flubbed communicating about the breast cancer screening guidelines and worked really hard on getting the evidence together and assumed that the facts would speak for themselves. They flubbed it again about a year ago with the revision of those guidelines, again, working very diligently to summarize the evidence and paying no attention to whether or not that they would be understood. And they've just now done it with the prostate screening guidelines. And interesting, I mean, sort of touchingly in a way, they knew that this was going to, I saw this quote, they knew that their recommendations might be controversial, so they spent an extra 2 years on the science, but chose to fly blind on the communications. This is not hard to do. It's not hard to get out ahead of it. It's not hard to prepare communications, but they chose not to do it. You think about the nuclear industry. There was, that after the tragedy at Fukushima, there was nothing coherent coming out of our nuclear power industry, which has been suffering with communication problems for 35 years, and it was the news media that managed to patch together something coherent. This kind of phobic reaction to evidence it's kind of bewildering. I mean, it's really kind of a psychological problem. I think some of it comes from a phobic reaction to the public that people view, and I think a disdain for the social sciences. So people communicate badly, they think that it's their audience's fault, and they think that there's nothing you can do because understanding the public is refractory. It's a black box. You couldn't understand it. And they wouldn't think of reaching out for help to people in the news media who know a lot about the public psychology and the problems with communication, or to social scientists who can help to untangle these things.
And could you introduce yourself, Larry?
Oh, okay, I'm Christina Diebold, and I was speaking of phobic aversion to evidence. What do you think is the best way of countering the campaign of disinformation on climate change being put out by the fossil fuel industry?
Well, I'm half in engineering and half in social sciences. We teach a capstone course for our students where we give them a problem. So last year we did a policy problem. Last year we did a project on the Marcellus Shale, which some of you will be familiar with, which has some of the same properties of science in a contested agenda. And I think that what we try to teach our students, which I think would apply to this whole class of things, that there are people who are just not interested in it. That there are people for whom a position on one side or the other is a statement of faith with whoever people that they align with, and you will find people among the skeptics to climate change for whom the evidence doesn't matter, and you'll find people among those who are really concerned among climate change who are not particularly well informed, but they trust the people who view this as a scientific as a problem. I think that a lot of the communication about climate change has adopted the scientist perspective rather than the perspective of the audience. That has tried to teach climate change as a kind of teachable moment. This is stuff that we would really like you to know, rather than to start from where people are coming from and building out. I think that from what I've read about the activities here, we're going and talking to individuals, talking through, finding out, becoming a trusted source with them, finding out what the impacts are for their individual lives, which is something that many people can do, is probably the most effective way of assuring that any issue gets a best judgment. I've heard that that, psychologists talk about what we call dual process theories, reaching your heart and reaching your mind. We need to to work on both levels for those people who are really concerned about climate change, to speak from the heart about what it is, and then to give the kind of facts that they do. I tend to believe that when scientists, I have a belief in what sometimes called non-persuasive communication, that give the evidence that you believe to be pertinent to the decisions that people are making, that once scientists abandon the role that they're suited for, which is speaking from the facts, that they lose their credibility, and they also learn their ability and end up playing on the turf of people who know how to do the kind of symbolic manipulation rather than speak to the facts.
Thank you.
And can you introduce yourself?
Okay. I'm Mackenzie Rockcliffe from the School for Policy and International Affairs. Kind of to continue on that, I see a similarity to the autism storytelling that you were talking about. And so you were just saying that the scientists should stick to the facts, but that seems like a direct contrast to what you were saying what would work for autism, that you need to tell a better story. So, and also, I'm always really surprised when younger people who go out on the internet and they seem to be more well informed, but then they're also, I've read articles where they're more subjective or more vulnerable to conspiracy theories. And so I would think that students would be more concerned about sustainability, more concerned about climate change, but at the same time they might be more vulnerable to the kinds of appeals that you're talking about, related to autism. But so yes, if that's a question.
A couple of years ago, I had an invitation. I was grateful to get an invitation to a meeting organized by Autism Speaks, which is one of the new generation of kind of activist philanthropies, and they had an interesting approach. They anticipated that they were going to they knew that there was going to be a rush of research showing weak evidence of perhaps weak correlates of autism from genetic and environmental and other ones. And they thought that for their audience, for the people that they were trying to serve, that this was going to add a level of confusion that would in ways make matters worse, that parents would feel responsible for doing things for acting on information that really didn't yet support any action, and that they thought that their obligation was to get out ahead of the research, to help people to put it into context, to say, we're trying really very, very hard. We don't really know what the sources are. There's going to be lots of controversy. Don't be driven to do things that aren't proven, especially if it comes at the price of, taking care of your children and family members in ways that you could do, and feeling more guilty about trying to do things that are difficult to impossible. They said so. They wanted to put the research in perspective, and then wanted to put as much evidence. Say we really would like to know the cause. But let's put our effort into figuring out how to make life better for the people for whom this is part of who they are. So I think that you could, if you take what psychologists sometimes call, or decision scientists sometimes call, an inside view of looking at what people are grappling with, and if you can help to put the noise into context and give them the things that they really need, maybe you can take market share away from the people who are better at confusing them, because that makes you their ally, in a way that somebody, which they sense that other people are trying to manipulate them.
We have lots of students here, and one of the things I'd be interested in hearing is your thoughts about, Dr. Fischhoff gave us a lot of ideas about how important it is to have different disciplines work together. Any students here who want to say a few things about what that means to you or how you'd like to act on that?
I learned a lot. I'm a first-year student, and this was very practical, very, very helpful, and I loved having all of the different angles. Like, you really made it practical, you know, and that's what you're here trying to do, and you did it very well. And so I liked, there are a lot of things standing out in my mind, but the whole internet thing, you know, it is not effective because people love this conspiracy thing. And so the educating and bringing science together with people in different ways or getting different resources online is great, but I think that we all are taking away more of a level head about things and an ability to make better decisions. I'll just say one more thing. I liked what you said about the medical things, because people just go to the doctor and they trust their doctor too much, I think, and nothing wrong with respecting a doctor and getting his opinion and counting it a great deal. But we've got to ask practical questions, listen to ourselves, and take responsibility and seek out all the information that we can, you know, along with what our doctor says, to make good decisions. So thank you very much for today. It was really wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Let her keep speaking. Thank you.
My name's Ruth Poland, and I'm in the education department. I'd like to be a science teacher. When you were talking about some of the skills and the specialists that are needed in science communication, I was kind of thinking, you know, as a science teacher, we kind of have to be all four of those things: the domain specialist, the analyst, the social scientist, and then the system specialist. And I was wondering if you have any particular advice for science teachers, and also if you could choose one of those four things that is really the most important for us to focus on, because it's a lot, what that would be. Thank you.
That's great. In a way, thank you for being a science teacher. So I think science teachers, so you have these, sometimes it's useful perhaps to distinguish between science education, where there is curricular knowledge that we need to get across so that people can learn more science as it's conceptualized by science. And then there's the communication of science as it is relevant to as relevant to particular decisions. And I think back to the science teachers I was fortunate to have. They would be the ones who could get across the curriculum in good ways, but then would find really to do the science education, and then would find really interesting problems in our lives that could then be illuminated by the science. And their success at doing that was this, in a way, I think, the decision analyst part. You could say, gee, of all this stuff that we've taught you, here's something that would be really helpful in deciding why your bike's tires keep going flat because you leave it out in the sun and whatever. So those showed me that science was useful, and that out of all this, that there would be a bunch of other things in this science that would come in handy at one day. So it gave me faith in science. I think in our professional communication of science, where we don't have in a sense, the good fortune of being in the same room and really getting to know our audience, I think it's the decision analysis part that's the most difficult. That is to figure out what to say of all the things that you could say when you're being often strongly lobbied by people to say, talk about me, talk about me. I've worked with people from science and technology centers on and off over the years, and they're often often under pressure to make this a kind of vanity publication for the scientist, rather perhaps at the expense of pulling the audience into seeing that this science really is important to your life and can help you to do a better job with it.
We want to thank you. Can we all give him another hand? We want to give you something that's about Maine. This is a wonderful piece of pottery from Edgecombe Pottery. They're internationally known, and this is just one way that we're saying we hope that you'll come back.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Hope to come.
And David's now going to take us into the next part.
Thank you. I guess I can leave your, okay.
So, I have some disappointing news, which if you didn't hear before, George Mitchell missed his flight in LaGuardia. He was counting on being here. To my knowledge, this has never happened with us before, for him to get here. A whole bunch of people, there was a last-minute gate change. He wasn't the only one who didn't get on that flight, and he sends his regrets. And he actually specifically mentioned that he would be glad to come back soon to meet with faculty, students, and others, particularly because of his interest in the Sustainability Solutions Initiative. There's going to be a wonderful reception in about 10 minutes. Great food, great opportunities to talk to Baruch and many others here. But I promised Senator Mitchell that I would deliver his remarks. He gave them to me ahead of time, so I'm going to do that along with a brief introduction, which I wrote, and I just, my heart would be broken if I couldn't deliver it. So there you go. And you'll see why at the end. Senator Mitchell is known throughout the state, the nation, and the world as a remarkable leader who has steadfastly worked to solve some of the most difficult challenges of our time. Whether leading the effort to reauthorize the Clean Air Act as Senate Majority Leader, chairing the peace process in Northern Ireland, investigating the problem of performance-enhancing drugs in Major League Baseball, or seeking peace in the Middle East, George is widely admired for his sense of hope, his deep humility, his integrity, and his unwavering belief that we can and should work together to solve our problems and create a better world. So whether you're in Belfast, Maine, or Belfast, Northern Ireland, you'll find that people view George Mitchell as one of the great role models of our time. Earlier, Linda, who gave a wonderful introduction, used the term boundary spanning to describe Baruch Fischhoff's efforts to bring together experts from diverse disciplines and connect science with society in ways that lead to better decisions. George Mitchell's work is another example of such boundary spanning, particularly in the ways that he has built bridges between disparate political, religious, economic, and environmental interests to improve communication, seek common ground, and solve pressing problems. You can't help but admire his courage in the face of adversity, his resilience in response to those who say it can't be done, his ability to keep searching for solutions when others have thrown in the towel. If you have any doubts about whether he's paid his dues, you only have to remember that he once described his work in Northern Ireland as 700 days of failure and 1 day of success. What more powerful symbol could we ask for of the triumph of hope over despair, of courage over fear, of the resolute over the wavering, of a belief in a better world over acquiescence to the status quo? Of course, there are times when even George Mitchell's incomparable leadership skills aren't sufficient to achieve success. So what do you say to someone who suffers defeat, whose hopes have been dashed, who's discouraged about the prospects for the future? Well, if George had been here today, I would have said to him, George, there's no way on God's green earth that you could have prevented the September meltdown of the Boston Red Sox. He's not responsible for that debacle. And besides, I'm sure they're going to have a better season next year. And it occurred to me as I was thinking about him making it here 3 times out of the last 4 events that puts him at a batting average of .750, which is pretty damn good. So he did ask me to deliver his remarks, which will take me about 6 minutes, and then we can go outside and have a lot of fun times together. So this is George speaking. Sorry about me being here in his place. I'm grateful to President Ferguson, Provost Hunter, and the entire UMaine community for organizing this annual event in my honor, and to this opportunity to join the discussion regarding such important issues. I commend Baruch for his long-standing commitment to help citizens and societies make better informed decisions regarding complex issues related to the environment, public health, national security, and other pressing concerns. I also appreciate his deep commitment to public service as a scientific advisor to many government agencies about such important matters. We live at a time when the challenges facing society have grown more urgent, but no less contested. In such circumstances, the need for effective decision-making at all levels of society is greater than ever. But in a world full of advocacy, Baruch is right to ask, where can we find credible, relevant, and trustworthy information? And who is looking out for the decision-making needs of citizens? I believe that institutions of higher education, like the University of Maine, can play several key roles in helping citizens make better decisions. First, their faculty possess an extraordinary breadth and depth of collective expertise that can help in understanding the nature of societal problems we're facing and identifying potential solutions. One key to finding those solutions is bringing together experts from diverse disciplines, economists and biologists, engineers and anthropologists, and many others, because the problems are so complex. Second, faculty with expertise in communication, psychology, and related fields are uniquely suited to assessing the information needs of citizens and helping to communicate technical information in ways that are useful to them. And third, colleges and universities have the potential to serve as a kind of neutral ground where diverse groups within society can engage in constructive dialogue and debate about important issues. It is particularly gratifying to watch the creative ways in which the faculty and students involved in Maine's Sustainability Solutions Initiative are working to help academic institutions fill these critical roles and contribute more effectively to decision-making processes. Led by the UMaine Center that bears my name, SSI represents an ambitious institutional experiment in how research universities can serve society more effectively. And when the SSI team speaks about their efforts, quote, to connect knowledge with action to create a brighter economic, social, and environmental future, they are keenly aware of the need identified so clearly by the wonderful work of Baruch and his colleagues, improving communication between scientists and citizens. I learned firsthand the challenges involved in effective communication about scientific and technical information during my work on complex environmental issues in the Senate. I also learned that individual and societal commitments to environmental protection must go hand in hand with a dedication to economic and social well-being. This is one reason I applaud SSI's interest in the emerging field of sustainability science, which works with stakeholders to tackle the challenges of sustainable development. Although there's an ongoing discussion about the exact meaning of that term, I believe the essence of the sustainable development concept is its focus on the type of world we want to help create for future generations. How can we make decisions that result in a strong economy, thriving communities, and a healthy environment? How do we balance the need for continuity and change in our society? How can we ensure that future generations have more opportunities, not fewer? I first wrote about the sustainable development concept 20 years ago in my book, World on Fire. So it's an honor to have one of the founders of the field of sustainability science, Robert Cates, with us today. As you may know, Bob is the chair of SSI's advisory board. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, a recipient of the National Medal of Science from the President, and the Presidential Professor of Sustainability Science at the University of Maine. I hope you'll join me in giving him a hand. Bob, please stand. I believe that SSI and related programs are sorely needed in today's world. But I also know that such activities sometimes encounter criticism and resistance due to the disparate and often conflicting nature of stakeholder perceptions, values, and goals. It can be difficult to persevere when such efforts encounter setbacks or get caught in the crossfire of public debate. But it is important to remain steadfast in the belief that scientists can respond to difficult challenges and more sustainably meet the needs of current and future generations. Indeed, SSI's measured but enduring optimism is exactly the spirit that is needed for this kind of work. In a larger sense, the ethos of SSI reflects one of my deepest beliefs, the importance of public service. The many faculty and students involved in SSI have committed themselves to a goal larger than themselves, a goal of helping to build a better world. Based on my many experiences in public service, I believe the long-term rewards of such work will more than outweigh the efforts involved. By articulating a common vision, building broad-based partnerships, and focusing on the needs of others, we can create a brighter future for Maine, the nation, and the world. And I think George deserves a big hand.